So this is about right for translucency. Sometimes what I also do to give it a little more variation, because right now the translucency is the same across the entire skin. So what I sometimes do, just for extra bit of variety, extra bit of detail, is I take whatever I'm using for my diffuse texture and plug it into thickness mask. So the thickness mask, think of it as a color multiplier for the intensity of the translucency effect. So let's go ahead and plug that in. So I'm going to middle mouse drag this, which is my diffuse texture, into thickness mask. Okay, and then of course turn on thickness mask. Whenever you connect any texture, just remember to turn it on. As you can see, that kills a lot of the translucency that used to be there. So I can compensate for it by turning this up just a little more. Again, I'm going for, when I'm adjusting front side translucency, going for an extra bit of maybe 15% or so extra bit of brightness. Usually it's going to be a fairly warm color because, well, you know, there's blood underneath their skin, and that's what the light is scattering off of. So it should be that reddish, kind of these warm colors, as you can see, already defined. Feel free to change these, especially if, and also keep in mind that even if your Leprechaun, you give him some other type of skin color, such as green or blue or something more exotic like that, these colors here are more of what define his, think of it as the blood color or his internal colors, that regardless of skin color, if, for example, if he were to be cut and, you know, he bleeds, what would this color be that he's bleeding? So if he has, you know, purple blood or blue blood, then you would, you know, have those colors in here. But if he bleeds red, then you're going to have these warmer colors here. So again, think of this as the colors of his the tissue, like the blood vessels, fat and whatnot, that's sitting underneath the skin. That's what you would adjust these colors to. Okay. So now that I have about the right amount that I want for front side translucency, again, you can always toggle off and on to see. You can see that extra bit of warmth, especially in those shadow areas. Next thing I want to do is I want to calibrate it from the back side. Okay, so I want to turn, I can either use this light up here, which might be kind of hard to do because there's also a floor here. So let's just go ahead and use this light to the side. And as you can see, as I turn toward it, this looks very, looks too translucent. It looks waxy, as if the light is going through his head completely. So there's several things we can do to tweak it. So it would be these three up here. So we tweak the translucent minimum. That's how we got any translucency effect at all. And then we're going to use the light translucent distortion, light translucent power, and light translucent scale to adjust this backside scattering. Okay. So as you can see, the distortion tends to be kind of like a Fresnel effect in that it pushes it more towards the edges. Let's take a look at the power. Power has a similar effect. It's a seems to be a very similar effect. And then the scale is just a overall multiplier. So these I usually tweak hand in hand. You kind of have to juggle all three of these settings together. But ultimately what you want to get is where it doesn't look like the light is passing completely through, because again, we're assuming he's about the size of maybe a child or so, a human child, so and his head's probably going to be the size of an average human head, and there's bone and other types of denser materials that light is not going to pass through, so it wouldn't make sense for light to pass completely through the entire head. So basically just adjust these three settings until light is just barely coming through, but not so much so that it looks like the entire head is just made out of wax. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and use these, and if I really suggest you experiment with your own, and also experiment with these colors. You'll see that as you change these different settings, one of these colors might be more dominant than the others. So a lot to experiment with here. But if you just want to use some nice round numbers that I'm using here, let me give you some. Let's do light translucent distortion 0.3. Let's just round this off to 6, and let's round this up to 0.6. And for the minimum, I'll just go with 0.25. Just some nice round numbers so you guys can use these if you choose. Okay, as you can see, it's very subtle. It's there and gives us an extra bit of warmth in the skin. A couple of tweaks I want to make. Now that I'm looking at the specularity, and it's probably more specularity and reflectivity. Now that I'm seeing the specularity on the profile of his head. I'm seeing that it's a little bit stronger, a little bit sharper than I want it to be. It's making it look a little too wet, and looks like he's got some layer of slime on his skin. Of course, we don't want that. So you might want to also turn the Leprechaun's head so you're looking at it profile on. And I believe if I use a setting such as, just give you a nice round number of 75, as you can see, we're getting a decent amount of speck, but it's not super shiny, super wet looking, and this looks a little more appropriate. So I think I'll keep it at 75. And another troubleshooting issue is, notice how, because of the fact that the ear is actually pushing through the hat, that their close proximity is causing some issues with the shadow, because the light is almost directly overhead, slightly behind, so you would imagine this shadow from the hat to completely cover this portion of the ear, and it is not. And we also have some light or something poking through over here that isn't supposed to be happening. So the way you would fix that is using shadow bias. Shadow bias is a setting that traditionally would be handled on the actual light source itself, but because of the way this DX11 shader is set up, you would actually do it in the shader itself. So this is a general troubleshooting thing that can make shadows be more accurate and look a little better. If you go to the top of the specific shader that's assigned to the objects that are having the shadow issue, you would look for shadow bias, and if the shadow isn't falling where it's supposed to be, then you would sometimes just need to turn the shadow bias setting lower. In fact, what I'm going to do here is make the shadow bias value, instead of 0.01, 0.001. So only 1/10 of that original value. And if I hit enter, as you can see now, that artifact that was above the eyebrow went away, and now the shadow from the hat is properly and accurately going over his ear. Okay. One thing also to watch out for is, even though the shadow bias, having it lower, would solve some problems, it can also create some problems, in the sense that you get bands, these dark bands of shadows, and that could be a result of having your shadow bias too low. So as long as you don't see bands, and as long as the shadows are going where they're supposed to, then you'll know when you have the correct shadow bias setting.